Hello, today we're going to be learning how to make some Ragged Life rag rug letters like these ones here. As you can see, you can do every kind of letter under the sun. However, today we're going to be learning how to do this using a letter E, which I have here. The particular type of rag rug technique we're going to be learning is called loopy rag rugging, which you can see here. If you're interested in learning the other type, then you can see some of our other projects. So the first thing you want to do is you want to print out your template like I've done here. The next thing that you need to do is simply to just cut it out, which I'm going to do now. So once you've finished cutting out your E, you want to get your foam board, like I've got here. At this stage, you want to either glue your template to the foam board, or you can just hold it in place while you do the next step. So at this stage, you just want to draw around the template onto the foam board. Once you finish drawing around the letter, you take your scalpel and your metal ruler, and you basically want to cut any of the straight lines using the ruler, like I'm doing now. Just be careful to keep your fingers well away from the blade when you do this, as obviously it's quite a sharp blade that you're using. So once you've cut out your template, you want to get your hessian, which I have got here. This hessian that we're using has got kind of what I consider a fairly tight weave, but you can go slightly looser than this if you're a beginner. What you want to do is make sure that your template is at least 9 centimeters away from the outside of the hessian. If you place your template too close to the edge, it just is going to mean that you're not going to have enough room for the border around the letter, or you're going to be rag rugging too close to the edge, which makes it slightly more difficult. So if you put it nice and central, and once again, you are just drawing like so. Just going to make sure that everything looks right. Yeah, perfect. So once you've drawn around your letter, you want to create a second border around 2 centimeters outside the original letter. So I'm going to use a ruler to do this. Just make sure that you've left enough space between them that the E isn't going to become kind of swallowed up by the lines. Just this gap here. You want to make sure that these two lines aren't too close together, otherwise your stitching isn't quite going to work. So once you reach this stage in the process where you've sketched out your letter E template along with the border, you want to then stitch around each of these lines. This is normally done on a sewing machine, which I don't actually have right here, but what you want to do is set your sewing machine to a zigzag stitch with the stitch width as wide as possible. My sewing machine goes up to a 6.0, but do whatever you can, and you want to keep your stitch length to its default. You then want to stitch all along every single one of these lines, so all around the edge of the letter E and all around the edge of this border. Once you've done this, it will look something like this. So as you can see, I've got a zigzag stitch going around all of these different lines. It's at this stage in the process that you're ready to rag rug, hooray. So I find with my letters that what works best for them is to create a dark border to them. So I traditionally use black material to rag rug my border first, and then I fill in between with different colours. So I've pre-prepared some strips of black fabric to begin my loopy rag rugging. If you'd like to see how to cut your strips for loopy rag rugging, then you can see one of our other videos, which is in the description. So to do rag rugging, you need this nifty tool called a latch hook. You can either kind of use the latch itself, or you can tape it open if it's kind of causing you problems, whichever you'd prefer. So I'm going to just start at the very kind of top of the E and work my way around. So you always hold your fabric underneath the hessian, and you basically insert your hook wherever you want to. The first thing that you do is you just pull an end up through the hessian. And I normally pull mine to about 1 centimetre in height, just to kind of give it enough kind of height to stay in securely. But different people rag rug at different heights, so do whatever feels natural to you. I'm then going to go into the next hole of the hessian and just kind of pull, very casually, a loop up through the hessian. And you continue on, just working your way along this row, rag rugging one loop at a time. And the thing which makes things neat in loopy rag rugging is kind of consistency of height. So you want to make sure that all of these loops are around the same height. And I'm lucky here because I've got a very, very long strip of fabric. But if you're kind of using something small, like you've cut up a baby grow, for example, this project works really nicely as a way to kind of use children's clothing to create kind of unique things for the bedroom and things like that. If you're using a small thing like a baby grow, you'll end up with much shorter strips. That's not a problem, just when you reach the end of the strip, you want to pull the end through to the top. So even though I've got a really long one here, I'm just going to demo how you do that. You would snip it off to the same height, and when you begin your new row, you would just pull your end through the same hole that one of your previous ends came out of. So I'm just going here. And one of the most frequent questions I get asked in loopy rag rugging is how many holes can I miss out and how many holes, should I be rag rugging into? And I guess the difficult answer to that is that there's no kind of right or wrong answer. You just you rag rug a little bit further away when you feel like the hessian's bunching a bit, and you rag rug tighter when you feel like there's visible hessian. So at this stage you can see that this kind of row of zigzag stitch is very visible. Don't worry about that, because once you fill in the letter, it'll all kind of disappear. Once you finish rag rugging around the entirety of the kind of outside border of the letter, you'll end up with what looks like this. So as you can see, my kind of zigzag stitch is kind of still visible on the inside of the loopy rag rugging, but it's all kind of rag rugged around the edge. So once you've done your outside, you're ready to fill in on the inside. So you can see here that I've rag rugged a letter Z, and I first of all did a kind of rag rugged border around the edge in a blue and white check, and then I filled in a pattern check in between. But for the moment, I'm just going to show you how to do one row along this E. So once again, in exactly the same way, I'm rag rugging from right to left this time, but previously you saw me rag rugging from left to right. It really does not matter one iota which way you do it. You can even rag rug towards yourself if you want to. And once again, you just want to make sure that kind of the height of the loops is kind of very consistent with the border, just because you want your letter to be nice and neat. But, if it does look a little bit ragged, it doesn't matter. That's kind of part of the craft, really. So that's my first row, which doesn't look particularly impressive right now, but don't worry, because as soon as you put in all the other rag rugging, it all comes to life. So once you've kind of filled in the inside of your letter, ta-da, you will end up with something like this. And I've used all different types of fabric in this letter. So once you've finished rag rugging your letter, the first thing that you do is you cut it all out. And you want to be just cutting around the outside of your zigzag stitch. You want to be nice and careful that you don't cut any of the stitching, and you just get as close to it as possible. So at this stage, you'll end up with your letter, which is all cut out like this. If you want to see what another letter looks like, then I've also got a letter H here, just so you can see that you can do different colours, different patterns, and it's the same kind of theory of leaving this border around so that you can then assemble the letter. So this is when our foam board base comes back into play. So you can see that where I rag rugged the kind of black border around, it makes the letter slightly larger than the template, which is exactly what you want, because you just want to make sure that the sides of your letter are entirely covered by the kind of rag rigging. So at this stage, we flip over to the back of the letter. So this is actually quite a nice kind of view so that you can see exactly how the rag rigging should be looking at this stage. So I've kind of kept it quite nice and neat, quite tight, and there's very little kind of holes shown. And once again, like I said before, you don't want any of those kind of ends pointing downwards, just because it makes it a little bit riskier for it to get pulled out. But don't worry if not, because everything in rag rigging can be easily fixed, so you can just go back and pull them up if you have got any loose ends. So now what you want to do is just align your foam board base with the letter. So once you've aligned your foam board E with the kind of back of the rag rigging, this is when the staple gun comes into play. So I'm just going to pop that there. What you want to do is kind of start at either the top or the bottom of the letter and just fold over one edge. And this is going to make a fair amount of noise, but you basically just want to attach it along the base. And you don't need to do this too kind of firmly. I always flip my letter so that then I've kind of got it tightly to the bottom as well, so it's all kind of nicely snug in there. Once again, just repeat the process. So once you've finished stapling the kind of border around to the foam board, you've finished your letter. Woohoo! You've got your letter now. So as you can see, the kind of black border around the outsides covered the sides of the foam board quite nicely. And if you're a kind of perfectionist, which some of us are, you'll then look at the back of this letter and go, eek, that looks terrible. I want to tidy that up. It looks a little bit like Frankenstein letter right now. So at that stage, I normally take my template that I cut out earlier, my paper template. I draw around it onto some felt, just cut out a kind of letter E kind of felt background and glue gun it to the back. And then if you want to hang it, you then normally just put a little kind of hook with a screw on the back just so it can be hung. Equally, you can put it on a kind of mantelpiece, you can kind of just put it on a sideboard. They look very effective wherever you put them. So, but if you do want to kind of tidy up the back, you'll end up with something that kind of looks a little bit like this. Just make sure that if your letter isn't symmetrical, so an E for example, just make sure you draw around the letter in the right way so you don't end up with a backwards letter. Sometimes it has happened. So there you have it, two beautiful rag rug letters. Not everyone has got a name beginning with the letter E like I have, so if you're interested in doing a different letter, then you can find our other templates in my book Rag Rugs, Pillows and More. My name's Elspeth Jackson, and I hope you enjoyed watching, and happy rag rugging everyone!